Okay, thank you very much. Before I start, I do want to just kind of touch base with some of the things that have been said today that I cannot agree more. I think messaging is a big part of flood resiliency, and something I'm hearing from many people today is uh, getting that messaging out there, and that sometimes mitigation doesn't always equal elimination. Sometimes mitigation is just reducing the risk, but the risk doesn't go away. So that's actually where my job kind of comes into play. So thank you for having me today. My presentation today is on the flood manual that the City of Winnipeg has. Just a bit of an overview of what I'm going to talk about today. So a bit of a background of where the flood manual came from, its overall concept, how it works, describe some of our floodproofing tasks that we do within the city, talk about the procedures that pop up when we have to respond to a particular flood, and some of the improvements that we've made since 1997. So going into background, the 1997 flood was a big reason for why we have the flood manual today. Some background on that flood. Things started off in the fall of 1996. There's a lot of soil moisture in the basin heading into the winter of 1996-1997. It was an unusually long and cold winter. Snow cover developed in early November and persisted until mid-April 1997, with 4 blizzards producing record snowpacks across much of the valley. The first flood forecast issued at the end of February in 97 warned that with adverse weather conditions, river levels could surpass previous floods that particular century. The later March forecast reaffirmed that potential flooding was going to be a potential major flooding year. But then we had gradual melt from March 21st to April 4th, reduced snowpack and briefly improved the conditions. But those who were here may remember the blizzard of the century. That was in April 4th, dropped about 50 to 90 millimeters of precipitation across the whole basin. At the time, forecasts weren't improved, so things stayed the way that they were initially looked at. Cold conditions persisted in the north, while melting accelerated in the south, creating a near-perfect flood condition. Those who were around may have seen this particular graphic here. This was an article from the Free Press at the time about Grand Forks sustaining significant damage when the floodwaters started to rise. It was a bit of a wake-up call to us here in Manitoba. So with that, the forecast went up and City had to respond. Won't go into details of what we had to do because that's a topic for another day, but maybe focusing on the lessons learned. What we learned at that time was there were significant limitations in our existing flood manuals themselves. City used to have a series of physical hard copy flood manuals. Different districts would act out on what they had to do, but those only went to about a 19.5 feet James level. I'll get to what that means later on, but it was to a lesser level than what actually did happen, which was 24.5 feet James. Many flood measures were implemented on a more reactionary basis rather than a proactive basis. The city recognized the need to compile and enhance the existing information that happened at the time. What we wanted to do was learn from that event and be able to use it to future flood planning. So the flood manual was awarded in early 2000 and completed in 2003. And the idea is it's a comprehensive set of known actions or procedures required to fight a flood stored within a geographically referenced database. A little bit more information about the 97 flood, but 1/3 of the city staff were seconded to help with the flood itself, not just water and waste, but all city departments. There were about 200,000 volunteer days spent sandbagging the city. But tying things back into how we manage floods and flood protection, what Winnipeg needed to know at that time was how do we manage a wide range of floods that could hit the city, especially when those large flood events aren't as frequent as something like we even saw this year. So what the city did was invest in creating a GIS-based flood manual from scratch. It's probably one of the best investments the city's made in flood management within the city. So the manual itself, the way that it works, it estimates a river level throughout the city at various locations throughout the city. The water level is not consistent, so in the south end the levels are higher than they are in the north end because that's where it's flowing. We've got procedures with trigger levels that will trigger if those procedures are actually at a level lower than what the predicted water level is going to get to. If a procedure is executed, it's something we call an activity, and it's something that we will flag and respond to if needed. And the tool itself is a procedure query that produces tables or GIS information showing what the activities are throughout the city. Those trigger levels, they're typically set based on what the inundation level is, so that's the point at which something will flood, minus about 2 feet of freeboard, but it could be something less. It could be 1 feet, it could be 0 feet. It really depends on the procedure type. So what really drives the flood manual is that predicted water level profile along the Red, the Assiniboine, the Seine, and Sturgeon Creek. Based on the predicted water level at any given location along our river defines what the corresponding flood activities are in that particular region. The levels in the city are referenced to James Avenue. On the map there, it's a location right where the Red and the Assiniboine rivers come in. It's a central location with the city. It's kind of our main location that we reference information to, and when we talk floods and the severity, everything's referenced to James Avenue, and it's the height the water level gets above the normal winter level, which is 0 feet. Something that's very interesting with the way that water flows through the city is because of where James is located, being downstream of 2 major river systems, we could have the same James level but completely different responses on either river, meaning maybe the Red requires a lot more flood control procedures, maybe the Assiniboine requires more flood control procedures. So we need to know what to do so we don't needlessly go out and activate flood control procedures and use up resources that weren't necessary. In 97, at that time, the majority of the flow coming from the Red the majority of the flow coming through the city was coming from the Red and very little coming from the Assiniboine. So it caused a very steep profile in the south end of the city, requiring much more flood control procedures to be carried out at that point. But like I said, every flood behaves differently, and so this is why we needed a tool that allowed us to work not on the fly, but work with a scenario as it plays out and be able to respond to what it is going to do to us or do for us and what we have to respond to. Second point here is the primary diking system. On the map there, those are the lines that are in red. In most cases, those primary dikes are the road closest to the river. Another point is our floodfighting tasks. So these are going to be water level dependent, starting with our sewer system controls and then moving to things like temporary sandbag dikes for at-risk properties, and that's typically on the wet side of the primary dikes. Regarding the floodproofing tasks within the city, just kind of a bit of an overview of what those are. I mentioned sewer system controls, so that starts with things like activating flood pump stations on our combined sewer districts, checking flap gates on our outfalls to make sure that water is not backing up into our sewer system, and then installing temporary pumping when an outfall is actually activated and water needs to be discharged around it. Outside of our primary dike, that's our secondary lines of defense, so things like sandbag dikes. So typically we don't start sandbagging private properties until about 20 feet James-ish. And then undertaking other alternative floodproofing measures which we call our external agencies list. So these are people who they might have specific flood control procedures, and in that case we're providing them day-to-day updates of what's happening and notifying of the risk, and then they have to take the necessary steps to protect themselves. We also carry out residential isolations. Those are where if a sandbag dike is needed on a private property and the water does get up to where the dike is, we have to isolate the sewer system so that if that dike was to fail for any reason, it doesn't go into the sewer and then overload the sewer for people who aren't affected by that. And then other activities, we will have to seal wastewater manholes on the dry side of the primary line of defense. So this is where we don't have in areas where we don't have gate chambers in our outfalls to prevent water from going up the sewer system. So we have to make sure that water isn't coming up the manholes and then flooding the streets and private properties. And then we will also have procedures to raise our primary dikes if necessary, and that's usually around the 24 feet James and upwards. So the tool itself, this is our hydraulic profile calculator. It's a tool that allows us to enter in the information of what we're actually seeing. So if there's a particular amount of flow coming on the Red versus on the Assiniboine, we put that information in, and it will spit out what a flood planning profile will be throughout the city. But where we start with this is we start very early on in the year. We start in February. The province will release their first flood outlook, with another release in March, where we'll update our data if things were worsened or if things were lessened. This is long before the snow melt starts to happen and the rivers rise. And then we base our flood planning on the province's outlook. The province will provide a favorable weather, a normal weather, and unfavorable weather condition for the city. We always base our flood planning on the unfavorable weather because we have to be proactive in our planning. So the idea is we plan for worst case, we hope for best case, and then we tend to meet somewhere in the middle. We are in constant communication with the province. So if the province is seeing things improve, they let us know, and that helps us with our flood planning and when we're actually activating activities and initiating flood control procedures. We have an idea of, is this an area we have to floodproof, or is this something that things are improving? Or if things are worsening, then it gives us time to plan and react around that. So the flood manual is a resource quantity database. So all flood control procedures requiring varying amounts of resources. So those resources could be things like sandbags, pumping capacity, maybe clay for clay dikes, and it's all depending on the predicted water level. The resource quantity database is linked to flood control procedures, and the system selects the amount of required resources based on the water level. So the graphic at the bottom there is just showing kind of an idea. With the predicted level there, we would then select the necessary resources required based on that predicted level, rather than just some number and go with it every single year. The main point here is that we're planning and then responding to each specific event independently. We use previous knowledge from past flooding events to improve our system, but as each flood is different, so is the response. The tool allows us to adapt our response and plan when conditions change rapidly. So this is actually a graphic of the GIS base from the flood manual. This is not a specific event. I just threw in an example just to show it, but really what to highlight here is every single one of those magenta dots is a flood control procedure. So it's not just sandbags, it's any type of procedure that happens, and this was very specific to the event that I had thrown in here. Unfortunately, my face is blocking the graphic, but the top right corner there is the whole city. So every one of those dots is a procedure. And then the bigger map there is now, as we zoom in, we get more information that will populate and show to us. But really what's kind of important to highlight here is, once again, not everything has to be acted upon. Every one of those dots and every one of those lines is something that's showing where we would require resources. So some of the lines there might be primary dike. Some sections may require clay to raise them up to the level to protect. Most don't. So it allows us to direct our resources where we need to direct those resources. Thing two is we can also, like a GIS, we'll get a table that summarizes everything everywhere within the city, but then we can also look independently at specific locations. We can look at a specific property, click on it, and it'll tell us this property will require X number of sandbags to protect it to this level. But then any information that we've saved on that property, maybe we had historical photos, maybe we had historical reports, anything, we're uploading those to the flood manual and we can pull that information up right away. So since 1997, we've had a number of improvements to our system. Some were on the flood manual, some were actually on our flood protection systems themselves. 2011 spring event initiated a major flood manual upgrade. Reason for this was in early forecasts in 2011 indicated levels in the city could be much higher than 97. So the profile plots there, the magenta line is what was estimated or predicted at that point for a 2011 level. It was going to about a 25-foot James level, which was about a half foot higher than 97. But like I was saying before, when we run things on our flood manual, if we had just used the 1997 level, there's going to be probably an overestimate of how many flood control procedures we need in the south end of the city, because once again, it's that interactivity of how the two river systems meet and how they come up with the same James level. So at that time, city responded. Once again, lessons learned was we realized we needed a manual that actually had to be raised. But flood manual at that time was up to 25 feet James. We had to build it up to 27.5 feet James. This gives us the ability to provide about 1 feet of freeboard if we were to experience another 1826 flood. That's the largest flood we have in recorded history. if it were to occur again today, where we put the floodway and portage diversion and Shellmouth Reservoir in operation. Permanent dike raises. So many, after 1997, through the Canada Manitoba Flood Proofing Program, there was a program where funding was allocated to the city. We at that time identified a number of communities within the city that where we installed permanent secondary diking enhancements. So some of these examples are Kingston Row, that's the right picture that you see there, Lord Avenue, Glenwood Crescent, Scotia Street, that's the left one, and all these pictures are taken during the 2009 flood event. We also have these areas protected by secondary dike bylaw, so it allows us to protect these dikes from being removed or altered. Another thing that the City of Winnipeg has done is we do have a program that's in place that was initiated in 2007 that allowed for floodproofing measures for properties that were susceptible to a flood of 20 feet James. It's kind of a more, when we have events of more frequent nature. This allocated funding to private properties who were eligible and where there's a cost-benefit ratio greater than 1, we instituted permanent measures. We've carried out the works for the majority of the eligible properties, and we're nearing completion of that initiative. We've updated our design standards for our primary dikes. So previously, the primary dikes would have been built to having a top elevation no lower than the 1981 flood protection level. That's about, at that time, was a 160-year event. It's more closely to a 100-year event, plus 2 feet of freeboard. We've now raised it, so now we've gone to something that's much higher. It's either the greater of 1997 water level plus 2 feet plus freeboard, or 700-year plus freeboard, wherever that's location dependent. But we then still have them designed so that if something happened, we could still build on top of these and do a dike raise if needed. An example of this is the university lands, the Southwood Circle development area. That area, the previous primary dike was on University Crescent. It's now been moved closer to the river and has been built to that new design standard. And that was to support the development. So just in conclusion, following 97 flood, the city knew we needed a better solution to fight a wide range of floods and to capture knowledge from a major flood. We've used this tool in various floods since 1997. It's not just the spring, it's also the summer floods that potentially occur. It's proven invaluable when forecasts suddenly change and the city has to respond quickly, even from 12 to 36 hours. But it's also good to do what-if scenarios for both short-term and long-term planning. It's not a static document. We are continuously updating it on any new information that we receive, whether it's property specific or maybe there's an area where we knew the ground has been raised through some project. We're always adding this information because we always want to know and come at a flood event with something that is current. To try to tie things back into the mainstreaming of climate adaptation, the best time to think about flood protection is well before the event actually happens. Areas that are susceptible to flooding on a frequent basis may have to think about how they approach flood planning, especially when conditions can change rapidly, and whether that's during the event or over long-term conditions. So we've actually had a number of jurisdictions reach out to us and learn more about our tool and see if they can adapt it to their purposes. And then finally, just clear communication between city and province is absolutely crucial, as is with city and affected homeowners. Something we do is we are in constant communication to the properties at risk and letting them know of what the risks are and when they may have to build their dikes. We don't want to tell people build a dike and then nothing happens because it potentially leads to eroding trust with us. That's what I have for you today. I'll take questions.
Thank you, Jeremy. That's really interesting. I was kind of thinking that you don't always appreciate all the work that goes on behind the scenes to keep us safe, and then when you avoid damage to your home or adaptation working well, is you sometimes don't even know if it's working well. You don't even know what you missed. So I need to workshop how I say that, but in my mind it sounds super smart. Yeah, so we'd like to open the floor to questions. I'll remind you can come up to the mic or just stand up and yell, or put them into Mentimeter too. So we've got some good questions here. So you mentioned that some other communities are interested in doing something similar. So one person has asked if another municipality wanted to develop something like that, what would be your top piece of advice for them?
Good question. I think the biggest piece of advice there is, I guess, knowing your system. Like I said, flood manual for the city of Winnipeg is very specific to how we have to adapt during an event. You take a year like this year, nobody heard that we needed sandbags on private property. It says we didn't need to, but there was still a lot of work that was being done with our sewer system, and that's to prevent basement flooding. So everybody floods differently. Everybody has different mechanisms. So know what you need to know, and how can you use a tool that might be able to build more efficiency and how quickly you can respond.
Sounds like a lot of solid data to kind of start with to do your planning and understand the system.
Yeah, like with our flood manual, it started off as, like I said, a number of hard copy flood manuals that district and regional supervisors would actually act on. And now well, that's still there. This tool it's not just for planning. I didn't focus on it here, but this tool is also an activity tracker. So when a flood control procedure triggers and it turns into an activity, it's now set up so that when it's been activated, it gets logged and it sits in the system until such a time that now the risk has gone away, and now we can actually take that off the list. So sometimes a good example of this is like manhole sealing. I've been told there's been times where staff have gone out to do the manhole sealing, but there's a car parked on top of the manhole. So now even that is logged into the system to say, okay, there's a vehicle here. Then staff will go back and reassess when they can, and they can go and actually do the work to seal it off, and then log it, and then it stays there until levels come down.
You don't think of just the human factor and how that impacts your work. We have time? Okay, so we'll take some more questions. So there was a question at the top left there about if the flood manual incorporates future climate projections, and if it can address the whiplash, as we like to call it, from drought to flooding, kind of back to back or vice versa.
Yeah, so the manual itself doesn't address climate change directly, but it is influenced by it in terms of it has kind of a wide swath of floods. So anything from something very minor to very, very major floods. So something that, like I'd mentioned in there, that it's been raised to that 27.5 feet James. So with other flood control procedures in the province, like the floodway, porch diversion, if we were to hit something like a 27.5 feet James, we're talking a flood that's much higher than even like a 500-year or 700-year type of event. So it, like I said, it doesn't do climate change, but the idea was to have something that's wide ranging so that if we were to hit something, at least we're prepared with a plan in place to act on it. And if it was to happen, once again, recapturing that knowledge of now this is the new flood, now we have to capture the information in there somehow and build it back into that tool and continuously improve upon it.
So, yeah, I guess the ongoing kind of learning and reiteration helps to incorporate that.
Thanks so much, Jeremy.
Thank you.